bring him to the middle? Okay. Ready? Okay, so I get to be the bearer of bad news, but could we squeeze the room in a little bit so we're at tables? I know you probably sat with a best friend or a neighbor, but if we could kind of squeeze in a little bit, it would help. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for coming tonight for what I think is really, really exciting and important work for the future of our district. I am Diane Allen. I'm the superintendent of the school district, and super excited. We've been engaging in this work since about May of last year. So a lot of information. Hopefully, you've at least seen the survey. But your input to us and to inform our thinking is very, very important. And so we have a community task force, and some of those members are here tonight. So it has been a significant amount of time spent to get where we are tonight. I do want to hit one thing. There has been a lot of conversation, like, why are you doing this now? And you also have a ballot on in May. Well, that's pretty easy. This has always been the plan. It's in our strategic plan and has been, because we have bond debt that's falling off in 2029. So in order to kind of have everything aligned, we need a plan that we can take to the community also to kind of prepare for that 2029 timeframe. So this has always been about the work. This is not related to May and that ask in May, but it is a facilities and a long-term process. So this is really about 10, 15 years. So the next Board of Education, the next superintendent have a plan in place moving forward. So I'm super excited to get this launched. We have been working with HPM for some time, Matt and Tracy both. I think, Tracy, you're kicking it off next. But thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Diane. Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? If this starts to drop and you can't, just raise your hand, because that happens eventually. The night gets long. So first of all, I want to welcome you. This is an exciting process. It really is. It talks about thinking about long-term for facilities and being in front of that. You know, your facilities are a really big asset for the district. They're a lot of money. There's a lot of square footage. They take care of a lot of people. That's the SAC bell, by the way, in case you need to get picked up by your mother. That's there. I've been aware of that. And also there's youth league tonight, so there might be some kids running back and forth, which is great because I love to see kids anyway. So so there's a little bit of that going on. But anyway, getting back to this is that, so, looking to your future about, what facilities are going to look like in the long term is really, really important. And to get in front of it early is really important. Even when Diane mentions that, even if it's not till 2029, until you can do something, a facilities plan really needs to address how you get to 29 and then beyond. And so part of the plan that we won't talk a lot about tonight because there's not a lot of options around it is that how do you do the preventive maintenance? How do you do the things that need repaired to keep the schools that you may do something significantly with at least at a warm, safe, and dry kind of status until you get to them without investing too much money with things that you might not have in the future. Okay, and so if, let's say that we have a roof that might be getting to the end of its life cycle, but it might be something that's in the bigger capital plan, why would we spend $2 million on a roof that we know we're going to do something with in 5 years? Because that's just not very good use of your money. And so a facilities plan has to address all of that together. And so what you're going to look at tonight are what we just call options, and they are just that, they're options. And I will tell you that, a little spoiler alert, that when we do this, and we do this process a lot, that it's never, ever the one option that ever kind of goes forward. It's typically kind of a combination of what you see. And so part of the idea of walking into the community is to talk about benefits and challenges of options that lay in front of you. Trying to figure out what is the best solution as we get to the solution we want to get to. And part of this is that In a facilities plan, there's plenty of data here, and I'm going to take you through some data. Bear with me for 25 minutes through that. But there's a piece of data that's kind of harder to kind of gauge, and that's that community input and how much to weigh that into a process. And I've always said in this process that, I've been doing this, about 25 years now. But in this process, a good facilities plan figures out how to weigh both in. That if you rely too much on data, you could ignore the community need. If you rely too much on the community voice, you could ignore data. And so you've got to figure out where the balance is. And that's what makes every community unique. I happen to live in Hilliard. That's my district. That's the one I wake up worrying about every morning. Not anymore, my kids don't go there anymore, so I'm good, they graduated, I'm an empty nester. But I will tell you that those schools are still part of my community. So I still very much pay attention to what's going on in my community when it comes to my schools, because I think they're that important. But they're different from you, much like Dublin is, much like just go around the loop, okay? And so what we have to do is we have to figure out your solution. And that's what we're trying to get to. And so we work with a community task force, and it's a very good community task force that represents all schools across the district, which is really nice. And they've provided some input as we go along in this process. They've looked at data. They've helped us kind of shape these options to kind of bring forward to you tonight. How many of you have seen the survey online or kind of watched that video too? Excellent. Very good. So on your table, just a couple things. You've got a couple QR codes. They look the same, but one QR code will be the state of the schools. That is a report that has all the data you'll ever need. Okay, so you can look at that, you can follow along with that, you can even download it on your computer and you can read through that. It is a really good document to kind of give you that baseline information of school data that you need. The other one is a survey in case you haven't taken it. I would encourage you not to necessarily sit here and take an individual survey tonight. Go home, think about it if you haven't taken it. I want you to really, really put some thought into answering that. And tonight, after I'm done with my presentation, you have on your table a yellow sheet of paper that is going to be about group discussion. And you're going to notice that there's no vote on that piece of paper. There's no, I want that one. That doesn't do anybody any good, right? Because again, we'll likely combine all of it. And so what we're trying to get to tonight is for the tables to have a discussion around the benefits and challenges of each of the options you see, kind of weighing them on their own merit, and then kind of in your individual survey talk about how you can compare them across each other. Now, at the end, I will take clarifying questions, but if you have a more in-depth question, we're going to come to you and talk to you at your individual tables about that. And the reason for that, I want the group discussion to happen, and I think I can give you a much better answer if I answer you kind of one-on-one. Unless there's some clarifying questions that you want on some of the data, I'm glad to answer those. But I found that to be a more kind of satisfying process that you'll get an answer that actually gives you some thought instead of me just trying to rush through an answer for you. Okay, so, and we've got Jonathan, we've got Diane, we've got Matt, all to answer questions. We got task force members. They're pretty well prepared also. They've been in this a while. I'm looking at one, she's like, I'm not sure I am, but I know she is because she's good in the data. But they're very well prepared, okay, to help answer some of these questions too. So bear with me for a few minutes while I walk you through some of this kind of high level stuff and how we got to where we got to. So in this process, again, we've gone through a lot of community engagement, with a lot of task force engagement. We've done a lot of data collection. We're at the point now where we're developing options, and these options are really to start setting a guideline for us to develop some longer-term recommendations for the district, okay? And so once again, we take all this community survey information. I think so far we have 400 plus online surveys already responded to. That's awesome to see. I think in our framework one, I think we had 1,000 or like 1,200 survey responses. Guys, I'm going to tell you how excellent that is. Like 1,200 responses is so good. It helped us set actually the format for how we developed options too. So we took all those survey results and we looked at those and we said, okay, there's some tolerance for a grade configuration discussion. There's some tolerance for balancing enrollment a different way. There's some tolerance for talking about early childhood education. And so when we can take those survey results and we can kind of decipher out of the response we get from the community, it really helps us shape a conversation around where you think the district should be going. Okay, and so that's what that first survey was about, and now we're getting to that stage where let's apply that. Let's apply the data, let's apply the framework. Now let's apply another level of conversation with the community to get input on about how we shape these options into a really good 5, 10, and 15-year recommendation for this district. So again, the State of the Schools report is in your, on your table. There's that too. I won't stay on that one. So let's talk about some of their demographics. Now, Marysville happens to be, I don't know, when I tell you I work with a lot of districts, I work with a lot of districts, okay, around the country. And this data right here makes you different than everybody in the world right now. And this is about birth rates. And birth rates are the foundation for how you're going to get students in the future, obviously, right? So what we try to track, first of all, is how many kids are born here versus how many kids show up in school here. It's a pretty good statistics to start how you're going to project enrollment, okay? And so the baseline tells us that if I get this many students born here and this many show up on an annual basis, then I can project at least my 5-year projection pretty securely with good housing data, with good historic data, with good survival ratio and all that kind of statistical formulas that have to go into it. But this is a baseline. And what you notice is that this district is increasing in births. Nobody's doing this, by the way. This is an anomaly across the country. And because we are seeing plummeting birth rates around the country, which is going to have a huge impact on public school enrollment. Oh, and by the way, it's going to have a huge impact on charter school enrollment. Oh, by the way, it's going to have a huge impact on private school enrollment and homeschool enrollment. The fact of the matter is that we have far less kids being born in this country than we did just 10 years ago on a birth rate. And so when I look at this, I'm going, if my ratio of getting students every year, so how many kids are born here versus how many kids show up 5 years later, somewhere sits in that 65% range, which is a pretty healthy survival ratio, believe it or not. That of every 10 kids born here, 6.5 show up to your schools, okay? And so it's not one-to-one, some leave, some come in, but you get the gist. So, but if that rate keeps increasing, that from just 10 years ago, when 667 kids were being born here versus 831, just do 65% of each one and figure out how many kids show up in kindergarten 5 years later. The answer is more. I'm a liberal arts major, so I'm not going to do the math. But the answer is more, and you know that that's going to happen. And so we got to prepare for that from a capacity standpoint. If you look at a historical enrollment, the numbers here aren't as important as the colors are. But when I look at numbers, I really start to look at that kindergarten and first grade enrollment to kind of figure out, okay, what's this really going to look like in the next 5 or 10 years? And how's that going to impact our schools? And if you look, again, just 10 years ago, my average class size was about 390. See this 390 going across maybe 400? 21, 22, 491 kids show up to kindergarten. 491. Now, progress 70 more kids in the district for 13 or 12 more grades. That's a lot more kids that are existing in your school system as you progress through there. Now, what's interesting is that as you look at this projection, or if you look at this historical enrollment, the red means the larger numbers. And so you can see these bubbles, can't you? You can see this low enrollment went through, and you can see this higher enrollment start to trend in. Does that make sense to everybody? See that large trend. Now, what's fascinating about your projected enrollment is that, if I look at the next one, is that red in the projection is actually the blue. It's actually your low enrollment over the next 10 years because you're going to see even a bigger bubble come through. That 490 going to 525 that just 7 or 8 years ago was 367 is almost 130 more kids that walk into your school district just to start. That's the good news. You think, right? I mean, no, yes, okay. So it's amazing when districts are declining how much they want students, right? And then when you're increasing, you don't want students. So it's kind of this weird phenomenon that happens in school districts. And it kind of just depends on where you're at, right? And so a lot of this sits outside the district control. Unless the district just continues to be successful academically, which they are, which means this will continue to be an attractive school district and an attractive city and an attractive county to live in, because schools are a foundation of that. And so however that works, again, we're not in control of approving development at the school board level. I mean, if that were the case, the school board might say, hey, wait a minute. We've got some capacity issues. We got some growth issues. We can't afford the facilities we have. And so, but there's also that economic impact side that says, the county and the city say that we've got some economic growth things that we need to meet. And so there's always going to be a balance there, right, in that, yeah.
Are new developments that are already approved or in process, are those included in the projection?
They are. So, Will, the question was, are those projections of growth in housing in there? And they are to an extent of this, is that there has been growth in the past. Okay, so that comes through with the survival ratios. However, I'm going to show you really quickly that we also did a yield analysis that altered kind of how we adjusted survival ratios. And so kind of I'll take you back one or two here. Like, you see this survival ratio? We do this grade by grade, okay? The art of enrollment projections is taking that kind of survival ratio and looking at the statistics like housing to adjust them to adjust to housing, even though the stats won't give it to you. So we do adjust it to get that, and you can see how much that jumps because of it. I actually think, and I don't think, I'm pretty confident that the 5-year projected enrollment, which kind of looks out there in this 28, 29, 29, 30, is a pretty safe projection. After that, it's a Wild West. Any demographer that tells you their 10%, their 10-year projection is accurate, Pinocchio them for a minute, because it just doesn't, I mean, it's hard to project 10 years. We're really close in 10 years. Our projections are very good, especially with the really good data that this county and this school district have. But that 5-year projection is pretty good. And so as I look at that and I go, okay, so let's lay on top of that kind of our school by school, and these are live-in projections. So what we do is how we run projections is we do an historical analysis of how, okay, of where kids live and where they attend also. And so we have to look at that a little bit. And so this one kind of projects out, but I will tell you on a school by school basis, projections aren't very accurate. And the reason for that is that school by school projections are influenced a lot by programs, by choice in schools. So you might see that that they change a program level to school, or that we've seen principals change and enrollment change because leadership changes at school buildings. And so a school by school projection also has so many different influences than just demographic influences that we don't really take them as really seriously because we can't. But they can show us trends. And this is probably more important, is to show us trends, because we can see, kind of where kids are being born and what boundaries are being born. Okay, and so we can kind of look at that too. So that's just another, again, piece of information we look at. Now, the other thing we look at is capacity and utilization. Now, capacity is a funny term. I think that people think capacity, oftentimes when they think about how many students a school can hold, people think that's a static number. Well, the fact of the matter is capacity is not a static number. And I'll give you a real for instance. So let's say that I've got a growing district, and I need to change a regular classroom to a special education classroom. So my class size goes from 28 or 29 down to 12, because that's the law. That's what it says. It says we got to get that down to 12. So I changed that classroom from 29 to 12. Didn't touch any bricks or mortar. Didn't do anything with change of program. The capacity of that building just dropped 17. Make sense? So there can be a range of capacity. But when you're trying to figure the capacity of a district, you have to set a standard. And the standard says, what are the programmatic goals we want to get to? Meaning, if I've got this many students, how many art rooms should I have? How many music rooms should I have? How many special education rooms should I have? How many gymnasiums should I have in some instances? And so that kind of dictates kind of the programmatic capacity that a building should hold based on the programs that you want to teach and your students can learn in those spaces. And so when we start to run those, you can see that the capacity across the district at the elementary grade level sits around 2,600. Okay, so if I look at 2,600 and I look at my current enrollment, I'm at 2,271. I've got a projected enrollment of 2,350, which puts my district about 90% utilized. Now, that's running about 28 or 29 students per classroom, because that's currently what you afford, and that's why you go after levies, to try to reduce some of that, get more teachers in the door, reduce some of that. That's why you do some of that. Now, if that number dropped to 25 in a classroom, all of a sudden that 90% goes to 100% utilization across the district overnight. So your buildings will be full. So when I look at this, though, I'm thinking, okay, so that's okay if my kids came in perfect packages of 28 or 29. From a classroom perspective, does it make a difference? And I will tell you it does. Now, at the intermediate grade level, when I look at the capacity of this building, and it's a good building, like this is a well thought out building. And the reason for this building has a lot of flexibility. You can do a school there, you can do a school there, you can do one school here, you can do something here and something there. This building is designed for a lot of flexibility for education in the future. Okay, so we see that capacity there is pretty good for that one. But as I start to move into the middle school, and I start to think about my projected enrollment, and again, at the middle school and the high school, we use a utilization factor of about 75%, meaning that we can't fill the building to its full extent. And the reason for that is because scheduling, period scheduling, and how you balance enrollment, how you balance those class schedules. Again, a really good example I can tell you, the reason we use 75% is because if I go to a high school, because everybody has to take ninth grade English. Ninth grade English always has 32 kids in it, but you only get 12 in AP Calculus because there's only 12 that qualify in that period for that. And so there's always imbalance through a high school day. Anybody who's ever been a principal at a high school will tell you that if they're at 80%, they're full, and they're probably right. But they'll tell you that that's hard to maintain that schedule. On top of that, periods 1, 2, 3 are completely full, periods 4 and 5 are underused, and then periods 7 and 8 get used again. And so we figure that 25% flexibility for a school to give you and provide you that flexibility in a building to maintain a good program in your building. And so it's a pretty good rule of thumb as we go forward. So as we look at that, we also do a live-attend analysis, which just tells us, okay, how many kids live in a boundary versus how many kids attend into a different boundary. And so the easy way to read this, let's just go to Edgewood because it's at top. What I can see is that if I go across here, there's 515 K-5 students that live in Edgewood Elementary boundary. Of that, 45 of those transfer out. Now, where are they transferring out to? Well, I've got 19 going to Mill Valley, I've got 16 going to Naven, I got 10 going to Northwood. Make sense? It's a pretty cool map to read as you're reading through it, but also that I have 18 transfer in, meaning I get 6 from Mill Valley, from Mill Valley I got 19 leaving, those 6 are waving to them as they pass them on the road. Then I got Naven 1 and Northwood 3 and Raymond has 4 students. Now, the only reason we do this analysis is just to kind of see what's going on as far as transfer rates and why students might be transferring. I don't really put a judgment on this number because there's all kinds of reasons students transfer. It could be a program that they can't get at one school. It could be that their mom or dad teaches at one of those schools and they just go with their parent to school. Okay, so again, all this tells us is a trend. Like, we should be paying attention to this. So in bigger districts, we do this a lot because we might want to look at boundary changes. And the boundary changes may not ever matter based on their live-attend analysis because they'll just transfer anyway. And so as we look at these numbers, we see that actually at under 10%, really good. Like this is a really steady school district when it comes to boundaries and attendance within the boundary. So our subdivision analysis, we do this, and again, I won't get into the numbers necessarily, but what we're looking at is we're looking at by boundary how many students are produced in a household. And so if I go across again in single family yields, I can see that the district-wide average for student yields is about half a student a household. So not every house you see being built out there, you get a kid out of. It's about 50%. And if I break that down into a K4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, about 0.2 are in the K4, about 0.08 at 5, 6, 0.08 at 7, 12, and about 0.15 at the high school level. And so as you start to do these analysis and you do these yield analysis over time, you could do more predictive analysis when you see development happening. And so I can start to say, okay, if we're going to get 4 bedrooms, 3 baths that come in at $350,000, and that neighborhood over there is exactly the same profile, what is my expected yield out of that, and how many students can I expect out of those future subdivisions? That's pretty powerful information to have as you're looking forward. And so this analysis not only helps us on projections, to the question that you asked earlier, but it also helps us looking at potential analysis, which is a lot different oftentimes than just a projection. And so when that planned unit development comes in and we hear about it and we know how many units and we know how long it's going to take to build out and we know how many bedrooms it's going to be, we're better informed. So again, just smarter. Now, on the multifamily, I know multifamily is a big concern for a lot of neighborhoods because these multifamilies come up and it's unpredictable. But also understand that that K-12 yield is about half of what a single family yields. Okay, and so when you see multifamily units, you can expect about a quarter a kid per unit out of it. Okay, so as you build out. And so again, continue to keep our eye on it, to make sure we're adjusting those enrollments and adjusting those capacities to where we need to be based on that enrollment going out there. We also did an educational adequacy analysis, and again, the adequacy analysis simply looks at building standards to make sure that every school has the educational spaces and resources they need to teach your kids. And we actually do an analysis on that, and we give cost to improvements of buildings for the educational portion, not just the condition of the building. Okay, so again, there's a lot of detail in here that says, you know, what's a constructible cost versus a non-constructible cost, but all you have to know is that a constructible cost is something that can be reasonably done through reasonable construction. And when I say construction, use that loosely, because I also mean that if the standard is to have an 82-inch LED screen on the wall and there's no one on there, I can fix that. I can spend $1,000 and put that TV on the wall. And I can give you a cost for that. But if you want your classrooms to be 900 square feet and they all come in at 700 square feet, I'm not sure that's very constructible because I'd either have to knock out walls or build additions, which doesn't give me a like-to-like assessment. So I might call that a non-constructible, although I can give it a cost because I can tell you how much it would cost to give you enough square footage to get it to where it needs to be. Now, what that tells me is that schools can only get a maximum score when it comes to the educational adequacy of their facility. Your district actually comes in pretty good when it comes to this. And so if I look at this, again, I don't think there's any surprises here, but when you look at schools that, well, let's, again, Edge was on top. But based on the standard that you want for space in your school buildings, the current Edgewood Elementary can only reach about 87% of what it would ever be able to do educationally, because it just has constrictions in it that won't allow you to get to the full program level you want it to get to. But I will tell you, brand new buildings don't reach 100% a lot of times. And so, and then as you go through the district, you can see it's a pretty good one. But when you start to look at the cost of this, you can see that between the two costs, there's over $6 million here of educational fixes you can do in the district just off the top. Just $6 million, okay? And so educational adequacy just gives us an indicator that there's more to do than just fix the buildings, which is this chart right here. Currently, if I look across the district, there's approximately needs over the next 5 years, about $44 million of actual need in the district, which when I say need, I mean things that, this is the term I'm going to use, things that are either broke or going to break. And what I mean by going to break, reach the end of their life cycle. That's when, and the only way, and you're not going to, spoiler alert, you don't have $44 million to spend in the next 5 years, okay? Look, no school district in the country can afford all their deficiency needs. Zero. Just know that. There's 15,000 school districts in the country. Nobody can afford all their deficiencies. It's just too expensive. And so what starts to happen is you start to defer maintenance. Okay? So let's just go to your house. Let's say your furnace is supposed to last 20 years. You get to that 20-year mark, your furnace is still working, you're pretty good, you don't quite have the money yet for it. I'm going to bump it back another 2 or 3 years. Same with schools. If a system's still operating, if we can bump it into deferred maintenance beyond its life cycle, we will. Now, the risk you take is that when does that system break? When does the chicken wire and duct tape don't work no more? And that's what you risk when you're looking into that. And so what you want to do is you want to do better predictive analysis to say, when do we need to replace the roofs? When do we need to replace the air conditioning units, the air handlers, all those life safety things that we need to replace? And what can we defer until we have to defer it, until it becomes a priority item? On top of that, this condition also measures things like paint and floors and things like that. But paint's not going to carry a priority like a roof would. And so you prioritize it to say, okay, what are our real priority needs when I'm looking at it? This will be more important when we're talking about how we get to a next bond program if this community could support a next bond program. So how could we get to that by using this data? Now what you can see is that at 44 million, the district's in pretty good shape overall. A 4% facility condition index is very good actually. But look what it does over the next 10 years. It starts to escalate and escalate and escalate. And if you start to look then at the next 10 years, that 44 million turns into about 120 million overnight if you don't stay in front of it. Now, the district will stay in front of it. So the district has an annual budget for repair and maintenance and capital projects. And this district does a very good job of prioritizing that. And you can tell it by the current FCI. Now, what's getting harder and harder to do is to budget to make sure you can fix it. And again, you're not in any different situation than every school district in the country. And so as you look across there, what you can see, and again, I'd pay more attention to the colors, is that green is good, yellow starts to get to fair, that orange is poor, and then red becomes critical. And so as you start to move in the next 5 years, you can see what can turn into critical very quickly, which means not only the systems replacement become critical, is that the dollars then become critical. And what you don't want to get to, and I think that this is, and you know, again, we can say what we want about what we're trying to invest into schools as communities, or what we have to invest into schools. But the fact of the matter is that at some point, everybody's contributed to maintaining our schools. You all have. You all have for the past 30 years, or however long you've lived here, you have maintained those school buildings. Now, the next generation is going to need someone to help maintain those school buildings. Because buildings are like people. They'll take care of themselves. And they will, unless you just try to keep taking care of them. And so the immediate thing, always, is warm, safe, and dry. Always. And so how do you prioritize that until you can get to the capital program that you need to really get in front of that FCI to maintain that FCI at 5% for the next 20 years, which then saves you all money. Because the last thing we want is that we get to year 10 or 15 and there's a $150 million bill kicked onto the generation that's one generation down the road that they can't afford at all. You can't do that. Much like the previous generation that helped you do the high school and some of those other projects in your last bond program is giving you this number now. And it's maintaining it. And again, I think to a very good extent. Okay, so that gets us to our options. Okay, so there are 3 options, and I will tell you, I think that when we walked into the last task force meeting, we walked in with 4, teetering on 5 options. Task force looked at it and go, well, one option just got thrown out pretty quickly, by the way. It was, 5 transitions in the district and a bunch of money, but it was an option that we just threw on the table. But let me walk you through the options kind of at a high level, and you have these on your table also. So these Excel sheets that sit in front of you, you can follow along in these. And what we've done is we've not only given you a description, we also have plenty of these options packets for maps if you want to come and get one for yourself. We also have just kind of a mapping and benefits and challenges pages for you. That kind of gives you an example of what it has on it for each option. But let me walk you through these, and let me give you some context behind them, and then I'll let you get to your work. So in the first option, the scenario would maintain the existing configuration, which means keep the K4, 5, 6, and 7, 8 configuration. In this case, and I'll give some context to this, Raymond is converted to a K6 to increase enrollment at Raymond and reduce the Creekview enrollment. Again, what we're projecting is that this building in the projected enrollment will get stretched to its limit. And so how do you avoid that a little bit? But the other context of this, walking through it and walking through the context of it, was there are a lot of operational efficiencies from a busing standpoint. Instead of just going to the next intermediate school and then making another transition, there's a lot of efficiency in that. Now, educationally, and the task force pointed this out, educationally, that this doesn't stay consistent with the rest of the school district to walk into the middle school grades. So that's an obvious challenge of keeping that building a K6. But it doesn't say you have to. It says it's just one suggestion in this option. If you didn't, we just have to figure out the capacity and utilization when they get to the next grade level. And we can do that. So, oh, did I lose? We just went to sleep. That's okay. But they're mostly on their sheets anyway. Now, this one would say a pre-K at all elementary schools except for Raymond. And the reason for that is that we just wouldn't have the capacity at Raymond to handle a pre-K enrollment there. And then we would have a minimum of 2 self-contained special ed rooms at each elementary school, which is important. And then the projected 28-29 enrollment would exceed capacity. So if you look at the bottom there, the projected enrollment in this says 2435 with a capacity of 2368. Now, the other thing we've done when it comes to kind of pricing in these is that if you look at the estimated cost, basically what we're saying in this option, this is basically a do-nothing option. This is keep the district as it is and just maintain your buildings. Now, you can see it comes in at a pretty nice price tag to do that over the next, to get in front of warm, safe, and dry. What it doesn't do, it doesn't programmatically get Raymond where it needs to be. Not even close. It keeps that old building at Raymond as it is, which means no improvement to that in this option. Now, it doesn't say we couldn't add that option in. We have plenty of flexibility. Now, to give you some context of what flexibility means from a financial standpoint, and again, these are really high-level numbers that will be massaged about 150 times until we get to the number, but we're somewhere in the range if you were to renew your bond program without any tax rate increase. So if you just maintain your current bond program, right, over the next election, it could generate about $150 million and not increase your tax rate. Okay, so you'd stay exactly where you're at. So this leaves a lot of room for some improvements within that. But it doesn't change kind of those transitions, and we would have to figure out then what the replacement value is for some of these buildings in here. But one of the framework things that we were told in the framework was there was a significant amount of people that said, let's do nothing. Okay, you got your option. Now, if you want to add to this option when you're talking in your group. Say, what can we do to maybe improve this option? But also, if there's a benefit or challenge that you don't see that we've already listed, list that for us, okay? So this is then, so that gives you kind of the map and the benefits and challenges. I won't read them because you have them on your table. Now, option 2, if you'll turn to that. Now, in this case, we would actually replace Edgewood at 600 capacity. Now, the other thing I want to tell you real quick as we go through these options, if you see anything on like replacement or demolition, or like at Edgewood we have like reno, demo, new. That's even more confusing, right? So what we mean is that we want to preserve any investment that this district has made recently. So Edgewood has like an annex, right? So keep what's there. At Edgewood, we can actually keep part of that building because there's still really good context to just part of that building we would keep. Why would we tear it down and lose square footage? We would renovate it and then tear down and add and build new. That's what we would do at Edgewood to give you enough capacity in that area for this particular grade configuration. Now, so what you see in this is that there is a replacement of there, and then we would also add a new elementary school. Now, people are going to be, well, where? Well, we could talk about that. You know, right now you have about 3 or 4 elementary schools that are within a pitching wedge from each other, right? And so where could you strategically place a school that didn't congest traffic, that balanced your enrollment a little better and gave you capacity where you needed it? Now, I will tell you that one option is that you have a huge middle school site that is accommodating for an elementary school. That could be a really good location for that. And it would do well for the enrollment and balance and things like that. We would have to look at a district-wide boundary change. Everybody talking about boundaries then, which is fine. You're going to have to do that with new school buildings anyway. Okay? So we got that on the list then. Then we would then convert, again, right now in this option it says convert it to a K6, but also do the reno, demo, and new at Raymond, which would put a significant investment, and you can see about $20 million investment into the Raymond School. Pretty significant investment. What this also includes, this would also include a small bus station that would house a bus or 2 on that site up there with full facilities that have a garage and have a fuel tank. So we wouldn't have to take buses all the way back to Marysville, all the way back there. We could actually have an area bus to save on transportation costs. Okay? So we would actually do that too in that whole concept. Also then, we would do, again, pre-K at all elementaries except for Raymond, but that's not even out because if we put it, we would just have to add more money if we did that. The self-contained special ed, Creekview and Bunsold are given additions, increasing their capacity because they're going to need that capacity for future enrollment. Now, here's where I'm not worried about the 5-year enrollment. I'm worried about the 10-year enrollment for those intermediate and middle schools. Because if you look at 10-year enrollment, they're toast. There's not going to be enough capacity at those buildings, and so we're going to have to prepare for that in the future. All right? And then again, district-wide boundary changes come with this because you get new elementary schools in this. Now, folks, don't fear when we say district-wide boundary changes, because here's what happens in a district-wide boundary change. First and foremost, when you build a new school, you have to get 600 kids there somehow, right? Or whatever the number is, 550, 600. You got to get them there somehow. And then you just start to shift the rest of the district. And so here's what happens, and I will tell you, because I've only done it about 100 times, is that after the 600, only 5 or 10% of the rest of the district really gets impacted. Like the rest of the district stays pretty stable because you're just adjusting and you're nudging the district down a little bit. And so most boundaries stay a lot intact, surprisingly, because of how you can do it if you did district-wide boundaries. You're actually more impacted if you just do these onesie-twosies. That hurts communities far worse to do that because then you're in for big changes. So if you were to build new schools, lift the boundaries off, reset it, grandfather kids in, and go from there and move forward. Now, this comes in about $141 million. It starts to push that. Now, notice what I haven't talked about. I haven't talked about high school improvements. Now, the good news is the high schools are in pretty good shape for the next 15 or 20 years. Now, from a condition standpoint, programmatically, we know there's improvements in science labs. We know there's improvements in athletics. We know there's improvements in fine arts that we will have to make. We're going to have to figure out to maximize our dollars in a plan like this, where are those strategic investments for the high school that we can start to make sure the high school stays in the forefront condition and programmatically too. And so we're going to need a little flex room for that to take care of our high schools. Okay? Now, let's look at that third option. Wholesale changes here. Give me 1 second. Okay, so first and foremost in this option, this changes the grade configuration of the district to a K5, 6-8, 9-12 model. Okay, so it gets rid of that intermediate kind of grade transition, which automatically tells you you have one less transition in the school district. Going to a K5, 6-8, 9-12 model, 75% of countries, or this country and districts are that model. Most of you probably went to that model in some way, shape, or form. So we're not reinventing the wheel by going to some weird grade configuration, right? So, but in this, you see the benefit of one less transition. That's a positive thing in the educational world. And so, and in this, you're going to have a 3-year experience at the middle school, which then offers more opportunity to start pushing more career and technical education into the middle grades because you're going to have more enrollment for the flexibility to do those kind of things and expand your exploratories, which you want at the middle school level. And so I think that this gives us a good opportunity to do that in this option for the pre-K 5, 6, 8. This would also keep, again, replacing Edgewood at the 600 capacity. Raymond would still get that, but would now just be a K5 building. Okay, so they're getting basically, you see the same $20 million investment there for that one. All elementary schools converted to K5. Creekview would be converted to a K5, so this building would be a K5 with a pre-K center centralized in one wing. Because one side of this building can hold about 600 kids. Yeah?
Since the budget is still staying the same in Raymond from option 2 to option 3, do we still maintain the option of our own busing station?
Yep, absolutely. And I should have said that. Thank you for that. So the busing station still stays there. It's really to maintain. That's an operational thing that'll pay for itself in a really short time. So we see that as a no-cost option, honestly, even though we got to invest in it. You're going to bring that dollar back. I'm going to tell you, doing that drive at $5 a mile, because that's about what it is to run a bus, and you do 2 buses a day, 180 days a year, start doing the math in your head. So by keeping 2 buses up there, see how quickly you can make up for about $1 million investment in a facility. So operationally, it's a better thing for us. So that's going to stay on the list, okay? And then, in this case, you would build a new 1,000 capacity middle school to be built on the current middle school site. So you would have 2 middle schools on that site. Now, the questions now get asked. Do we share a football field? Do we share this? Do we share this? Well, there's a lot of programming things to think about before we get to that, okay? What we do know is we're going to have the capacity to hold the students we need to hold in the next 10 years, if we were to do that. We've got a couple of years to program the building to do it the right way. Do you need a second competition football field? Look, it's up to you. If you want to pay for it. I know cities across this country that use 1 football field for 4 high schools. So there's ways to operate and use space efficiently, but again, it's your district. If you think there needs to be a second one, build a second one. But you do have to do more practice fields. You have to make sure the circulation on the site is good. You can share a lot of services on a site like that. Okay, so there's some efficiency in having that. And look, there's plenty of examples around the country of same grade level or schools on a same site. So again, not a lot to worry about. And on that site, it's so big, you can relieve congestion too, because there's many entrances and exits you can do on that site to control the site better. Okay, so with that, and we also know that when it comes to transportation in the district, the highest percentage of students that this district transports are middle grade students, which makes sense if you think about it. Okay, and so, but we don't think, again, the efficiencies come in. We're not doing a 2-stop. We don't stop at the intermediate and then go to the middle school and then have to come back. There's 1 stop. So there's operational efficiency in busing and our student transportation by going to 1 site for a middle school. So again, a lot of operational savings in this one, in this case. Feeder schools to the middle schools would have to be determined. So which elementary schools go to what middle schools? But what if you programmatically made the middle schools different and they had a choice to go? Maybe that's an option for you in the future. I think that's a great thing. So it just provides a lot of flexibility. Obviously, we're going to have to look at district-wide. We're going to have to look district-wide again. Now, you can see that this option comes in just under $130 million, which is a pretty good dollar amount to give you a lot of flexibility in a bond program to look at improvements to the current schools that you have, even your new elementary schools. Guess what, folks? In 15 years, they're going to be 25 and 30 years old. They're going to need some touch-ups. They're going to need some fixing. So we're going to need some of those dollars to continue to maintain those buildings too. And so you guys got to plan out for that. This one gives you some flexibility to do that. Substantial change is in option 3. This district looks a lot different. Yeah?
Does this building have the structure of maybe some minimal renovation to be used as a middle school?
Absolutely. This could be that too, if you wanted to. We toyed with the option of another elementary school and leaving this as the other middle school too. I think we have some flexibility to do that in this case. What we saw as the advantage to doing it there was all on 1 location, and resourcing and staffing and transportation.
But here this leaves all the kids in this.
You can do that too.
And then you split it.
It's a great advantage to have. So I think we have that flexibility in this case. In that case, we'd have to build elementary seats in.
Right, correct.
And do the opposite there. So I think that's a great way to talk about it in your
Cheaper
group.
to build an elementary school or a middle school?
Well, it depends on how much you need. You know, by doing this, you don't have to build an elementary school. You can save $40 million by not building the elementary school and invest 60 down at a middle school and serve more kids. So the balance is that. Yeah.
How much does that balance out though if we start talking about the transportation, like cost?
Well, I think there's significant savings in this case, walkability matters because, look, we're pretty compact here. Yeah, there's no question. So walkability could matter here. So I think that's one, again, that's a really good other scenario to fit into this scenario to think about. And I think as we do the long-term projection, let's look at that. I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
When are we talking about this happening? Is this the next year?
No, that's a good question. So again, we don't retire anything until 29. Now, here's what you need to do is that, and I think this is probably a good structure, if you think you could get to an ask that would pass, okay? Again, that's always a big ask. And it's a lot of responsibility for your community, even at a no tax rate increase, is that you start planning before. And so I know, for instance, like when Worthington did their 2nd phase, if you're familiar with it, they didn't have their dollars yet, but they ended up using general fund money 12 months in advance to do design, permitting, and all the groundwork. So the minute they started, they could get a school opened in a year because they needed a year of construction. So they use district reserve. Now, in the funding laws in Ohio, what they could do is they could repay themselves back in the reserve fund out of that. But it's a risk, because if the voters say no, then you can't reserve, you can't put back in the kitty, right? But Worthington was pretty confident that they'd built a 3-phase plan to get to the vote they wanted to, and they could. And so they got in front of their first year of being able to do it, and they saved a whole year of construction. And in this times, they saved about 8% escalation in cost, which is huge. 2030, 2031, yeah, which is already, if you can do the math, almost behind the 8 ball. Almost. Like, we got to get in front of it. And the other part, one more thing, and I'll answer this. One other thing about the 2 elementary schools is that you would likely prototype. That saves you dollars. In a design phase, it saves you a lot in purchasing power. You can do prototyping, which then saves some dollars. And so we might overestimate our costs a little bit because we just doubled the cost. You'll notice that Edgewood has a little more cost on it. Well, we'd have to demo that building. So it costs some money to get rid of a building too. So, but you can save some money in that and some efficiencies.
Is there a risk with Ohio education funding reform if we were to use funds from our general fund and then they change the rules and then we can't repay ourselves? Is that a risk?
Yeah, so it is a risk. I will tell you that on the capital side, there is less risk for change in that than on the operating side. So I think that's a fair question to ask. But they've really set, and mostly because the Ohio School Facilities Commission, or now the OFCC, has backlogged so far in their repayment that districts are having to do this. And so I think this year they approved the funding for schools that were finished in like 19. That's how far behind they are right now, at 19 or 20. And again, not the commission's fault. They weren't taken out of their own pocket. Somebody was taken out of their pocket, right? They're making up for it. And the commission's doing a really good job. So I would never say anything bad about the commission. I think the commission's doing a great job of trying to fund our schools. But that's how far they're getting behind because there's just no money in there to repay. So what they're trying to do is make sure there are strategies for school districts to get in front of their construction programs so they can stay in front of these big numbers. I think that's a really good question there. Okay, so a lot of data there, a lot of options in front of you, and I'm sure there's probably half a question in your head. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn it over to the small groups and let you work in your small groups. But I encourage you, if you have questions, to raise your hand. Again, I got Diane, I got Jonathan, I got Matt, and myself, and you've got task force members probably sitting at your table that can also answer a lot of questions for you. But I don't want you walking out of here with a question in your head, okay? So if you've got something, or if you have a question that you forgot to ask about and you've already finished your survey, just email the district and we'll get back to you, okay? Because keep in mind, we're about 3 months from finishing this plan, okay? 2 or 3 months, okay? Depends on when the board can get me on their agenda. I'm just kidding a little bit. But we want to make sure we do it right, not fast. You've got a little time to work this out, okay? And all those questions about, keep it in mind, all those questions about kind of programmatic things to fix. You know, we need a better art room, we need a better science room, we need a better special ed labs, we need better this. All fit within these dollars, but we would be here all night talking about those specific changes that we'd have to make. But they're intended to get it to the district standard that we measured the buildings to, which is a standard for your programs. Okay? So with that, also, I'm going to tell you there's no closing. So when you're done at your table, you're free to go. And you can stay here as long as the custodian doesn't kick us out. Okay? Other than that, I will be around asking questions, and I really, really appreciate you coming out here tonight and being part of this process. Don't lose sight of this process. We'll keep you updated online. We'll keep you updated with the recommendations, and we'll keep you updated when board meetings and task force meetings will happen too. So thanks again. Yeah, I'm going to come back there.